Few things are more fundamental to our success than learning. Today we're talking about learning and how the world of education and learning is changing. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to talk about leadership, teamwork, organizational culture, and human potential with experts from every walk of life. Your host is Kevin Eikenberry, a best-selling author and leadership thought leader for 25 years. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's book, The Long Distance Leader: Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. Order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/book. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Happy to have you back again today. And you're going to be happy to be here because why? Because we have a great guest, like we always do. And today, our guest is Danny Iny. He is a lifelong entrepreneur, a best-selling author, and the CEO of online business education company, Miracy. He's a high school dropout, an MBA graduate from Canada's elite Queen's School of Business. There's something in between there, I'm sure, and is known for his value-driven approach to business. Danny's here, among other reasons, to discuss his newest book, which is titled Leveraged Learning: How the Disruption of Education Helps Lifelong Learners and Experts with Something to Teach. Here's a copy of it if you're watching us. And by the way, if you're not watching us, you could be watching us. Danny, welcome. Glad you're here.
I am very glad to be here. Thank you for having me. And by the way, there is nothing in between those two things. So happy to share that story.
Oh, well, that's an even better story then, right? That's an even better story then. Okay, so why don't we just start there? Tell us about the journey. I mean, you don't have to tell us everything, but like, how did we get from growing up in Canada somewhere to high school dropout to where you are today, writing books and all that stuff?
Yeah, so actually, I had two educational moments. One was when I dropped out of high school, and one was when I got my MBA. And those two together kind of put me on the path to what became the book. So as a kid, the backstory, as a kid, I was the nerdiest, goody little two-shoes kid who was the teacher's pet and always had his homework done. I was that kid. And that was fine until about the end of the 8th grade. And then I go into the 9th grade, and it's like there was a switch that gets flipped in my head. And I'm sitting there in class, and I'm thinking, I am so unbelievably bored. I just can't take this anymore. And so I start cutting classes. And I'm a bit of an extreme personality. I don't do anything halfway. And so in the first trimester, I missed 152 classes. And the number just kept going up. And about a year and a half into that, so middle of the 10th grade, I was 15 years old.
So how you even were still going at that point is pretty amazing. Like
I was only marginally still in school.
How are they even counting you coming to class, having a name? But anyway, go ahead.
I have no idea. But I look in the mirror, and that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm like, what's the plan here? Like, am I just going to keep cutting classes for years and years and go to the gym and watch MTV all day? Like, that's not a plan. So I think I'm going to make this official, and I'm going to quit. And I'm going to do something productive with my time. I'll start a business. And what was fascinating around me was the prevailing narrative, right? The prevailing narrative around me was, Danny, you're making a huge mistake. You are throwing your life away. Now, there's two pieces to that.
At 15.
Yeah, this was me
As
at
if
15.
my life is over because I'm 15 and I'm making a decision. But anyway, go ahead.
But that's exactly what struck me, right? Danny, you're making a mistake. You know what? Maybe. I mean, I don't know how things are going to unfold. I could see that. But you're throwing your life away. There's a sense of irreversibility that in the back of my head, I was like, but in a worst case scenario, I can just go back to school. Like it's not the end of the world. So I quit school, and it turned out it's just one of the best decisions I ever made. I'm not saying everyone should do it necessarily, but I got to do so many things and experience so many things. It's not that I dropped out to just sit in front of a TV and eat pizza all day. I was like, I'm going to do something else. So that was great.
Okay.
So then fast forward 10 years. I've been an entrepreneur for about a decade. I've been involved in a bunch of different startups. And the most recent thing that I tried to do was this educational technology company. We're building software that teaches kids how to read. And this was right about the end of 2007, beginning of 2008. I was a young and inexperienced CEO in what in hindsight is one of the most complicated industries on the face of the earth. And by the time I figured out what I was doing, we were almost out of money. It was, the experts and the teachers, the experts and the kids liked it, but the parents and the teachers, they didn't get it. And so by the time I figured out how to pivot, we'd run out of all our money that we had raised from friends and family and whatever. And then the markets crashed. And so, that was game over for everyone who was in business back then. And so I walked away from that with about $250,000 in personal debt. And I was thinking, maybe I need some direction. Maybe I need some security. Maybe I need a safety net. Maybe I'll go back to school. I'll get an MBA. And the prevailing narrative around me was, Danny, that's a great idea. You are setting yourself up for a lifetime of success. You are opening all the right doors. Well, I did it. I went ahead. I applied. I did not have a high school diploma. I did not have.
How did they let you in? That's the real interesting thing.
Well, so every college, just about every university has a provision for students who take an unusual path. So most undergraduate programs will have a mature student program where you add 18 credits to your degree and you don't need a high school diploma. At the MBA level, if you get a high enough GMAT score and you bring to the table enough interesting experience, so even higher education doesn't actually value the signal of education only in the absence of a better signal. But so I get in, I go through this program, I invest a year and change of my life. I invest a lot of change out of my wallet.
Right.
And it was a huge waste of time and money. If I had to make a list of the top 5 or 10 worst investments of my life, this would be high on that list. And I'm never getting that time or that money back. And so what was interesting to me is looking at these two experiences. Everyone thought dropping out of high school, terrible idea, getting the MBA, great idea. But dropping out of high school, everyone sees as being totally irreversible, which it isn't. But getting the MBA, nobody even thinks about that, because why would you want to reverse something great? But it's totally irreversible. And that's what led me to think, okay, something's out of whack with the way we think about education. And 7 years and a lot of research later, that became the book.
That became the book called Leveraged Learning, how the disruption of education helps lifelong learners and experts with something to teach. And if you're looking, here it is. And so, Danny, the big idea of the book from my perspective, and I'll admit, I've not read every page yet, but I've read most of it. And the big idea is in the subtitle, The Disruption of Education. So let's start there. So what do you mean? I'm guessing everyone who's listening or watching has some idea of that, but what do you mean? And let's start there.
Yeah, so education is a huge, broad term. We have education that we experience throughout our lives: elementary, high school, post-secondary education, college, lifelong learning throughout our career. And so I'm talking especially, but not only, about college and then what happens after. And all this time, all this money that we invest in education, there's an expectation that we're going to get something back. But the world has changed, and what we're getting back is not actually happening. It's not delivering what it's supposed to. And that is why postgraduate employment rates are a disaster. It's why when you survey organizations and ask them what are they looking for in a new candidate to hire, education ranks dead last and has for years in a row. People are spending all this money on an education thinking it's going to open doors, but it doesn't. And that raises the question, okay, so what are we going to do about that? What do we do instead? How do we adapt based on this new reality?
And so if those are the facts at the moment, and you're saying, well, the disruption is still to come. So what's gonna, from your perspective, and one of the things, by the way, that I love about the book, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, the way you said it, but I love this idea. He says, I won't have everything in this book right, but I'm heading in the right direction, or something. I don't remember, you said it more elegantly than that, but I think that a lot of us ought to put that in our books to say, I don't know that all this is perfect, but I know I'm heading where this is trend-wise, this is the right direction. So talk a little bit about what do you think I want to sort of ask one more question about this big idea. And then, as I said to you before we actually started, I want to dive into what does it all mean to us as leaders and as learners and all that. But like, where do you think this is going to lead, or what are you thinking is going to happen? Mm-hmm. Put on your future hat for us.
Yeah, so there's something interesting about predicting the future, which is that we don't have to, because it's already here. William Gibson famously said, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So what does that mean? I'll tell you a little story. A couple of years ago, I was on a business trip. I had a connection and some time to kill in the airport. So I'm walking around looking for just interesting things to look at. And I passed by a Brookstone store. It's like, they've got all these fancy gadgets. And I'm bored and I like gadgets. So I walk up to the store and I see this Yoda doll, like Yoda out of Star Wars. It's about this big. It's on a pedestal, so it's about like, more or less eye level. And as I approach, like, the motors in it, like it turns, it opens its eyes and it looks at me and says, "Teach you to use the Force, I will." I'm like, cool, okay. And then he says, "Outstretch your arm." And so I kind of go like this, like I'm kind of using the Force. And then the motors in the Yoda make it like shoot backwards. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is so cool. I need to get one of these. And then the other voice.
You were already sold, Danny, at that moment.
I was totally sold. I was like, this is amazing. And then, of course, the other voice in my head says, "Danny, it's not going to fit in your carry-on and your wife is going to think you're an idiot. So don't do it." But, I say, "Thank you very much. This was really cool." And I keep wandering through the airport. And a while later, I step into the restroom and I see a line of men standing in front of a line of sinks, waving their hands wildly, trying to get the motion-activated faucet to let some water out.
Yep.
So that's what it means. The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. We have the technology that makes a Yoda doll able to talk to me and show me that I'm using the Force. And yet in the restroom, they can't release water when our hand is running under it. Now, the same thing is happening in the world of education. It's already being disrupted to no end. It's just not visible to everybody yet. And we're actually at a really interesting, really dangerous inflection point, because this is the point where people are starting to wake up to just how broken education is. And that's already happening, right? Undergraduate enrollment has declined almost 7% in the last 5 years. That's 2-point-something million people saying, "No, you know what? I'm not going to go to college. I don't think it's worth it." So this is already happening. But this is the time where there isn't a clear, well, what do I do instead? And so a lot of people are still saying, "I'm going to go to college. I'm still going to make that investment." And they're going to graduate 4 to 7 or more years from now. It takes the average American 7 years to finish a 4-year program. And when they graduate, much of the world will have already woken up to, hey, this degree that you got is really not worth the paper it's printed on. Not in all cases, there are exceptions, right? Out of the 4,000 or so colleges in the US, there are about 200 that are top tier elite schools that you can call selective. They accept less than 50% of the people who apply. But for the other 95%, which is where most Americans are going, because 95%. It's just they're graduating with a degree, if they finish, a degree that is really not going to do all that much for them. It's not doing much for them today, and it's going to be even worse. And yet the debt is still there. And that's the terrifying part. Student debt is now $1.5 trillion in the US. It's the second largest form of debt. It's more than credit card debt. It's the only kind of non-asset backed debt that you can't free yourself of by declaring bankruptcy. And it's the form of debt you're most likely to incur when you're not even legally an adult yet. And that's just
yeah,
awful.
Or at least some of it, for sure, right?
Yeah.
So, all right. So all of that, and by the way, you mentioned 2 or 3 other books, and there's a book that I read 4 or 5 years ago, which I cannot think the name of, and I wish I remembered it because I lent someone else the book, and that I'm sure you've read as well. That would be great companion for anyone who's thinking about this. But I want to move us past this and get us to why most people are here. So I love the fact that we can give you all something to think about that maybe you're not, or think about it in a new way. And I would strongly encourage you to read this book, Leveraged Learning, for that purpose. But I want to take us more practical for all of us here as leaders and say, so why does this all matter? It's maybe intellectually interesting, but I'm past that, right? And my kids are almost past that. And many of the people listening may be that case. Or they've already incurred the debt, right? Whatever. The point is, why should this matter to us as leaders in business?
Mm-hmm. So it's a very important question. And, I think the college debt, it's a travesty. It's awful, but it is what it is. That's really not the side of the equation that I care about. I care about the other side, which is what is it buying? Because everyone who thinks I'm done with that, unless they're 2 years away from retirement, they're not. One of the big transitions that we're seeing in the way we consume education is that, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago, it was a just-in-case model of education. We go through a whole bunch of education at the start of our career just in case we need it. which pedagogically was always stupid. It never made sense because there's tons of data showing that we don't retain any of it. So by the time we actually
it's what we had,
there,
right? What we had.
but,
So we
you know, it was okay. It was good enough. But it's not just the pedagogical challenges today. The big issue now is that the world is changing so fast. Lawrence Summers, the dean of Harvard, is on record saying everything you learn is going to be obsolete in 5 or 10 years. So the idea of like learning a whole bunch of stuff just in case you need it doesn't make sense. And we're shifting to a much more just-in-time model. So instead of spending months or years at the start of a career, we're spending weeks or months in small increments throughout our careers to stay current. And that's something that everybody needs to do. And more broadly, we need to think about what does it take to be relevant in the modern world for ourselves, for the people we're looking to hire, because it's a very different kind of world, right? The big thing that has changed more than anything, people talk about, oh, it's the internet, it's technology. But the key difference is the pace of change, how quickly things are changing. And if you go back, 10, 20, 30, 50 years, what it took to be successful was to be an expert, right? An expert is someone who knows the answers that today you can get from Google, right? And Google's faster. What it takes to be successful today is to go beyond expertise, right? What we need today is to be able to ask the questions that Google can't answer.
Right.
And so what we need to be able to bring to the table is not just that we know some stuff, because that's necessary, that's table stakes, but we need to go further. The people who thrive in the work world today are people who are resourceful and think well on their feet, people who are who take initiative and who take ownership, people who play well with others, people who deal well with ambiguity, and
can make connections from things that others have not yet made those integrate things, right?
Bingo, absolutely. And that means that we have to change the way we think about education completely, because if you want to create someone, if you want to develop someone, if you want to train someone to take initiative and to be resourceful and to handle ambiguity well and to think well on their feet, you don't do that by having them go through your 7-step set of instructions, right? They have to figure out their own, it doesn't fit at all.
Welcome, everyone, to the 7 steps for dealing with ambiguity, where Danny and I are going to teach you how to do this right now. Get your pencil. That's not going to work?
It's just impossible, because it's not about training the knowledge, it's about training the thinking habits, right? Dealing with ambiguity is all about, what do I do when I don't have a clear roadmap in front of me?
Yeah, and boy, the way that word habits, I think, is so critical. A lot of people don't think about it nearly enough. We're spending a lot of time thinking about that. So it's not just the skills that we need, it's the habits that we create to allow us to use the skills and to integrate and do those things. Because if we can get think about this, everybody, you don't have to think about tying your shoe. You can get the habit part right, then you can free your brain up to do the other stuff. Like Google can get that other piece of information for us. It's just like, Einstein famously said, I don't need to know my phone number because I can look it up. And we're just at a whole other level now where a speaker in our house will do that for us. Right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
So in the book, you talk about this idea of a leveraged learning triangle. And so let's talk about the components of that for a second, because I think that's a really useful place for us to go next.
Yeah, sure. So, where education starts is with knowledge. And that's where most of our education ends. It's about, let me impart to you a whole bunch of knowledge, right? And it's just, it's a symptom of how antiquated the way we think about education is. Another one of these things that I love is, throughout K-12, throughout college, we teach people to work on your work by yourself. If you get someone else's help on your work, that's called cheating. But then they go to the world of work, and when you get someone else to help on your work, now it's called collaboration. Now it's a good thing, right? But we train them not to do it. So there's a lot of this nonsensical thinking. So we start with knowledge, and we need knowledge. Knowledge is a foundation, but it's not enough. What we need to go is further. We need to go to insight, right? Knowledge is being able to parrot back what you've heard from somebody else. Insight is about being able to bring something new to the table. Insight lives at the intersection of curiosity and critical thinking. Now, the thing about insight is that it's hard. You've got to work at it. You've got to be immersed in the topic, and there are a lot of opportunities to say, you know what, this is too hard, I'm going to walk away. And that's why you need a third leg of the stool, and that's fortitude. And that's everything that falls under the broad umbrella of positive psychology. So grit, resilience, tenacity, optimism, mindfulness, all these things that allow you to stay the course and are actual predictors of success. So is knowledge still important? Sure. But for education, it's just table stakes. For education to produce people who are going to be contributive and valuable in the work world, successful in their own lives, we need to lean into insight and we need to lean into fortitude.
Which is beautiful. And so one of the things I loved about the book was that very thing. And I wanted you to share that rather than me leading with that. But I think if those of you listening, if you just took that one idea, knowledge, insight, fortitude as a triangle, and thought about that in your work for yourself and in your work as a leader, that would make a huge difference for us. What should we as leaders, you've got a bunch of here's what you've got listening to you right now, right? People who are wanting to learn, caring about getting better at leadership, or they wouldn't be here. And so what would you tell us? Willing, learning leaders who are wanting to get better, what would you tell us about what you've learned and what you've written about in the book?
You need to lean into people's interests. So this is something that's fascinating. Let's talk about insight and let's talk about fortitude. We'll start with insight. Insight, remember, lives at the intersection of curiosity and critical thinking. Now, if I ask you to imagine curiosity, just imagine it, right? You probably have an image of your mind. I can say two things with a very high level of confidence. First of all, that image in your mind is probably of a child. And second, the child is probably smiling, right? There is an excitement, there's an unencumberdness, there's an optimism, there's a lightness to the energy of curiosity. And that goes after things that we are interested in, right? When we talk about fortitude, same thing. When Angela Duckworth published her book, Grit, a few years ago, and the first research papers about that a decade before that, like the world of work, the world of academia went crazy saying, okay, great. So if grit predicts success, we need to teach people to be more gritty. But they miss a point, which is that grit is a cause of success, but grit is also an effect of pursuing things that are interesting to you. Nobody's gritty about everything. Nobody's gritty about things they don't care about, right? And so if you want to bring out the most in people, if you want to bring out the most in yourself, you have to find where the stuff you want them to do and the areas you want them to develop line up with the things that they are passionate about and that they're interested in, right?
It's that intersection in the Venn diagram, right? That where all that fits together without question, right? I love that line. No one's gritty about everything. It's not possible, right? It's just not possible.
No, gritty about everything isn't grit. It's obstinance. It's not a good thing.
There you go, everybody. There's your keeper. There's your keeper for today. Gritty about everything is obstinate. Okay, so I want to. You said, well, let me ask you one more question before I go there. You have been an entrepreneur and you've been a leader yourself in a variety of places. Is there something else, whether it's related to the book or not, that from your experience as a leader and an entrepreneur that you would want to share or that you think would be useful or that you just feel like telling people right now?
I mean, there's a ton of stuff. So this is not necessarily the best or most important advice. It's just what's top of mind for me right now.
Perfect.
So one of the things that I've been very mindful of on my journey as a leader and CEO in my company is that part of the challenge of being a leader, especially the higher up you go, is that the results of your work become more and more fuzzy, right? If you're working an assembly line, did you do a good job today? There's very good hard data showing that. Whereas how things are going in your organization today, never mind external factors and all that, but it's not a reflection of how good a job you did today. It's probably a good reflection of how good a job you did 6 to 18 months ago. And so just being mindful of that and saying, not to take too personally any of the results now, but to try to learn and say, what I'm looking at is a lagging scorecard. And I have to be focused on getting better. And I can't show up to do today and do a great job and expect everything to be wonderful, right? Because that's just not how it works, right? The world doesn't owe me a gold star for doing a good job. Doing a good job is what I need to do.
And you're piloting a ship, which means you can't turn it, a lot in a day, right? It's like it's the cumulative effort. And to your point, I love the idea of it being a lagging scorecard. Now, the next part of our program today is brought to you by by our Remarkable Way learning experience. And so people can learn more about that. And we'll be filling you in. If you do this, you got to go raise your hand by going to remarkablepodcast.com/way, where we're going to help you think about not just leadership skills, but mindset, skill set, and habit set. So remarkablepodcast.com/way. Now, what I'm going to do now, Danny, is I've got 3 words. You said that we all needed to be agile. You didn't use the word agile, but you don't know what's going to come next, because I didn't tell you this is going to come next. It's what we call the fast break. I have 3 ideas, 4 words. I'm going to give you the word. I want you to tell us whatever your first thoughts are, but no wrong answers. Like, tell me what you think about each of these concepts. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Number 1 is coaching.
Incredibly important, but also really squishy. So this is interesting. I had this conversation with someone the other day. A colleague of mine is one of the top coaches in America. She's one of the people who founded the field of coaching. And I was introducing her to someone else, and I was like telling them about this woman who's a great coach. And I was like, she's incredibly well qualified, incredibly great at her job. And I was struggling for what are the words to describe what she does that don't make it seem like kind of hackneyed, because everyone calls themselves a coach. And if I can't position the value of someone who's just incredible at this, because I don't have the words for it, that tells me that there's a positioning problem around coaching. And that is because there are some amazing coaches who do great work out there, and there's a million people out there who call themselves coaches and think they're qualified to do that because they like to give their friends advice. And
those are not the same thing. Second word is accountability.
Also very important. Something that people don't want as much as they say they want. Because here's the thing, if I want to do something and I really want to be accountable to do it, there's great research showing exactly what to do. You go to a site like Sticks, STICKK.com, you set up a commitment contract, and you say that for every time I don't do what I'm supposed to do, I'm going to donate $1,000 to the cause that I hate the most. So pick the political candidate you disagree with the most. Right. And it's going to be public, and it's going to be irreversible. But most people who know this research still don't do it. And so I think this actually ties back to coaching. We say we want accountability, we think we want accountability, but what's that prayer? Lord, give me the strength to be better, but just not yet. Right?
Not today, because today chocolate doesn't count, because the day that we're recording this, it's Valentine's Day. So chocolate can't count on Valentine's Day, right? So third word, well, it's phrase now, 2 words now. It's career planning.
I think that's a joke. I think
it might be shocking that I set you up with that. Go ahead.
I think career paths and trajectories today, especially for the most interesting and successful people, tend to be very squiggly. And it's hard to connect the dots looking forward. It's much easier kind of looking in reverse. So I think career planning is much less important than thinking at every point, what is the most I can learn? What is the best I can do? I think in general, the money you have in the bank, the money you're earning in your salary, is a bit of a lagging indicator to the value that you've learned to be able to create. So if you just focus on being able to solve the most problems and do the best work, the rest it's a bit of an exaggeration to say it will take care of itself, but it'll kind of sort of take care of itself.
Certainly directionally. Back to our point of being directionally correct, right? So you're running a company, you're writing books, you're busy. You got a lot that you're doing and a lot of things that you care about, clearly. But what do you do, Danny, for fun?
So I don't believe in the distinction of work versus fun. I think if that is someone's reality, they should really re-examine what their work is. I love my work. I enjoy what I do. It is fun. If the question is, what do you do for hobbies? Then I would say I have a daughter who's 4 and a son who's 2. And so I do not have hobbies.
I thought you were going to say they're your hobbies, and would say, well, I might want you to rethink how you framed that, but.
I like to walk. I enjoy walking. It's especially like I need my space to get oriented a little bit. So like I can't stand, like I wake up in the morning and like I'm woken up by someone climbing on top of me, and people like need things from me before I can see straight. So I usually make a point of waking up before everyone else. I take my shower, I go for a walk, get a tea, listen to a podcast like this one. And then I get home as everyone's waking up. That's my time for myself, is first thing in the morning.
Perfect. And so what are you, I mean, as I told you ahead of time, and as people who have listened before know, I ask everybody. I ask smart people this everywhere I meet them. I just meet a lot of smart people right here. So what are you reading now, or what's something you've read recently that people might find interesting?
Well, if you want something I've read recently, I can give you a list, because I read a lot and I've been lucky to get through some really interesting books. But what I'm reading right now, I'm only about a quarter of the way through it, so I can only speak to the first quarter. But it's a book called Our Higher Calling by Holden Thorpe. It's about higher education reform. And I'm really enjoying it because it's very well written. The author is super smart, and I don't really agree with their conclusions. And I really value that. Like it's no fun to read a book that you disagree with that is not well put together, but like finding someone really smart that you disagree with is the best way to explore your thinking. Now, I'm only a quarter of the way in, so I might change my opinion. I might decide he's right by the end of it. But so far, like I'm really enjoying it. I don't agree with the perspective, but I think it's really valuable.
So we've been talking with Danny Iny about his book, Leverage Learning, How Disruption of Education Helps Lifelong Learners and Experts with Something to Teach. And I will also tell you that he is, like me, a voracious reader. And throughout the book, he mentions other things that you might want to read. And of course, he's mentioned a couple during this conversation, Grit by Ms. Duckworth and others. So there's plenty of great stuff. And I appreciate you sharing that most recent thing. That's awesome, because that's the stuff that no one else is going to know about, right? And so I appreciate that. So the last question for you, Danny, is where can people find out more about the book, about your work, and about you?
Well, the very best next step everyone can take is to go to Amazon and order several dozen copies of my book for everyone they know.
So that they run out and they...
barring that, you can go to mirasee.com to find out all about my work. Or if you just want to take more of a look at the book, the whole thing is online for free, no strings, at leveragelearningbook.com.
And I'll say one more thing about the book that I didn't say earlier, but most books have a little summary or whatever at the end. And Danny practices what he preaches, because at the end of every section are questions, and he calls it, "Did you get all that?" The learning self-assessment. So at the end of every chapter, there's a bunch of questions, because you said it early on, and it's true, even for those of us that love to read. Like, I'm reading along, and this is really good, and then I get to the end, I'm like, oh, I just read 6 pages, and I've been thinking about groceries or whatever else, and or your 2 or 4 year old, right? So it's really a great book. I truly enjoyed it. And so I'm going to ask all of you listening and watching now this question: now what? What are you going to do with this? And perhaps it's that you want to think a little bit more about education as it relates for yourself or for your children, or just think about it in general. Or perhaps you want to think about the leveraged learning triangle, or perhaps you want to think about how you could apply some of these ideas with your team or with yourself, or how you could be a better coach of your folks using some of the ideas in this last 30 minutes, which means there's plenty for you to pick from. But if you don't pick something, it'll have just been a pleasant way to spend a few minutes. And I don't think Danny or I, either one of us, well, we'd like it for it to have been pleasant, but we'd like for it to be more than that. I know that that's true. So Danny, thanks so much for being here, man. It was a pleasure to have you.
Kevin, this was a treat. Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's been listening.
All right. And so everybody, we're here every week. So why don't you come back? You can join the conversation, get updates on what we're doing, and have a hand in how this podcast evolves over time by joining our Facebook group. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook. But most of all, just come back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.